Joining me now is Ambassador Dennis Ross, former U.S. envoy for the Middle East and an NBC News foreign affairs analyst. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us. And do you see any scenario where the U.S. becomes directly involved in the Israel-Hamas war under a Trump administration, such as carrying out U.S. strikes inside Gaza?
No, I don't. Look, one of the things that President-elect Trump has been saying is that he wants the war to be over before he comes in. He's been very clear. He wants to be seen as the president who's producing peace. I don't think that he's looking to engage in a war with Hamas. There's nothing the U.S. can do that approaches what the Israelis have done militarily to Hamas. That doesn't mean he doesn't have leverage. He does have leverage. He has a relationship with Erdogan, President Erdogan of Turkey, where the Hamas leadership has gone from Qatar. President Erdogan has made it clear he wants to have a good relationship with President Trump. President Trump can make it very clear if Erdogan helps to ensure that Hamas releases the hostages, he can have a good relationship. And if he doesn't, he's not going to. This is certainly a form of leverage. He can apply leverage to President Sisi, Egypt, who he often referred to as his favorite dictator. He can make it clear, look, I want to have a very good relationship with Egypt, but Egypt has to use the leverage it has on Hamas because it borders Gaza to help make this happen. So he has forms of leverage that will be, in fact, effective, and he can apply them. The fact that his rhetoric is very strong will actually give an incentive to those in the region to see what they can do to be responsive to him.
And Ambassador, on the subject of leverage, what about leverage for President Biden? You know, we've been discussing today that there can only be one president at a time, and President Biden says he is still pushing for a ceasefire deal in Gaza. So from a diplomat's point of view, how much more complicated does that process become when he's a lame duck and the president-elect is making these kinds of declarations?
Well, one of the things it does for sure is you have a number of leaders in the region, and here I would say the Arabs and Israelis alike, who do want to know what Trump's going to do. They want to know that if President Biden is doing something and they respond to it, that it's not going to be reversed by President Trump. I think here, the more that President Biden is doing to get the hostages released, or to get a ceasefire deal, or to come out with what might be described as an end-of-war plan based on the hostages being released, I can see President Trump or the people around him sending a signal they want to see that succeed. That way, he actually can help the success of what is being done right now by the Biden administration. If it looks like he's sending a message that's contradictory to it, that's a different story. But I think actually right now what he's saying about getting the hostages released, I think that actually reinforces what the Biden administration is trying to do. I don't think it complicates it. I actually think it actually reinforces it.
Ambassador, we continue to see some Israeli strikes in southern Lebanon. As part of the ceasefire agreement, President Biden said Israel retains the right to self-defense, but how concerned are you that this fragile deal could unravel before the 60-day implementation window is over?
I don't think it's going to. Yes, it's fragile, but this agreement was the product of a couple of realities. One reality was that Iran wants to preserve Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been dramatically weakened by the Israelis, weakened to the point where it has become vulnerable within Lebanon to the Sunnis, the Christians, and the Druze. Had they become weaker because Israel was going to continue to hit them, they might actually have lost their position within Lebanon. This is the most important proxy that the Iranians have. It's sort of the crown jewel of their what they call their axis of resistance. They want to ensure this ceasefire actually is one that was not only achieved, but it will hold. I think the Israelis have a memory of getting stuck, as they put it, for 18 years in the Lebanese mud. They don't want to be stuck there either. If there's a little bit of testing that's going on right now, the Israelis are determined to make it clear they will answer that. So I think, yes, there are details here. There's some testing that Hezbollah may be doing, but I would be surprised if this didn't hold. I think it will hold.
And speaking about Iran and its proxies, we've also seen the civil war in Syria reignite. So what does that say about the volatility of the region, and what impact does that have on Iran and its proxies?
Well, I think what we're seeing, we've seen HTS, which is in a sense an amalgam of different opposition groups, different Islamist groups that were based in the northwestern part of Syria in the Idlib area. we've seen them carry out an attack. I think it would have been highly surprising for them to have done this before they saw how much Hezbollah and Iran had been weakened by what the Israelis have done. I don't think what we've seen is an accident. These groups are also backed basically by Turkey. So you have an interesting mix here. Turkey is strengthening its position in the northern part of Syria at the same time that you have these Islamist groups doing it. Iran is sort of bringing some of its proxies from Iraq in to shore up the Assad regime. What you're seeing is a lot of upheaval within Syria, but you're also seeing a sign that Iran and Hezbollah are significantly weaker than they were, and you see some groups now trying to take advantage of that.
Ambassador Dennis Ross, we thank you so much for your expertise, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.